Good afternoon, Paul and Uday. It's the 17th of October, and today we are doing an internal brief. We may release this to clients if it is helpful. The focus of today's discussion is Indonesia's compromised political system. As you know, Indonesia will hold general elections on February 14th, 2024. There are three presidential candidates in the election race right now. We have Ganjar Pranowo, Anies Baswedan, and Prabowo Subianto. There have been mounting tensions over the upcoming elections, especially in light of the major corruption scandals in Indonesia. So, Paul, today I'd like to get your perspective on Indonesia's political backdrop.
Well, I think Indonesia is having democratic elections, but I don't actually describe it as a democracy. It's a plutocracy. Plutocracy being a democracy that, on the surface, people come to power gain of money. In Indonesia, people seek power, but they seek power for wealth. Use that wealth individually. They're not seeking wealth to assist other community members other than their immediate and extended families, and in some case, their wider sub-clan or clan group. The reality, sorry, mate, go ahead, Uday.
Just speaking of family, I think one of the most important factors in this upcoming election is the Jokowi family. It's with the outgoing president who has been trying to focus on entrenching him and his family into power. There have been attempts to delay the elections over the last 2 years, and recently Jokowi admitted that fact that he was using state intelligence agencies to monitor other political parties. So the dynastic kind of influence in Indonesia is just set to continue, and these are the power brokers of the country. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, exactly right, mate. That's what I was alluding to, but it's way broader than that. So you've got also Jokowi trying to have the law changed so he could get a third term. In the absence of succeeding with that absurdity, he's now lining up his dynasty by getting his son into a position where he can get an illegitimate crack at power. Megawati, of course, has been hanging on to the legacy of Sukarno, who was, of course, the president before Suharto. So people wanted a democracy that was on the basis of overthrowing Suharto because all of his kids were so hideously greedy and corrupt, and the rest of society could clearly see it. Democracy came about because people didn't want corruption, collusion, and nepotism. But amidst the Prabowo, Megawati, and of course now Jokowi trying to line up his own position, they all want power and they don't want it to help Indonesia. They want it to help themselves, and it's a hideous representation of Indonesia. Unfortunately, the grotesque acceptance of corruption and the grotesque acceptance of elitism is rife. And of course, the Indonesian average person in the street is very largely immune to it and is happy to go with the flow because it's always been this way. Unfortunately, when people are very much blessed with patience and tolerance, when the lid blows off, the lid blows off. And that happened with the Suharto situation. It's very important to understand not only we have the three candidates, Mithma, but we've also got the three vice president nominations. And so you've got 6 people, and then you've got political parties and their leadership. So all these people to secure power so they can then all dig the gold or milk the cow for their own benefit.
I think it's interesting that in Indonesia, political parties are not defined by ideologies or very loosely defined by ideologies. It's all personality based, and parties are essentially political wheels for certain personalities.
Yeah, that's right. And it's all about greasing the wheels of corruption. It's all about seizing power for money, but not money for good, money for greed. Unfortunately, 260 million people are victims of this lack of ability to make laws for the good of Indonesian society. The sad thing is these political parties and the individuals that run them actually feign policies and feign goodness so that they can manipulate people, whether it be a religious or a tribal or on some supposed policy lean. The reality is they're all the same. And this election, I expect we're going to see more issues on the street because people are increasingly getting tired of the same fiasco. The very thing that the perception that Jokowi was a good man and well-intended was the thing that brought him to power in the first place. Problem is he wouldn't have got to power if he wasn't backed by the sort of plutocracy maggots that I'm talking about. As a result, we're going to this time see less tolerance for the dark horse pretending they're coming to on a big shining night. People are getting more suspicious and fast with no real great alternatives seemingly to lean towards. There's a greater chance of frustrations. There's also a chance of one or two candidates are going to have a very late swing as the general population wises up to the shenanigans that are going on. I mean, this latest fiasco where yesterday the Constitutional Accord, I think it was announced, they're not going to allow a ruling of 35 years old. And that was all about Jokowi getting his son to be able to stand as a vice presidential nominee. And then today they sort of slipped in, unless they're already in a mayor position, okay? So we're pretending that we've got ethics from the court and that we're not biased and that we're not controlled. And then today, when they've made the formal announcement, they slipped through a little byline that allows exactly that. Collusion and nepotism at its best to lay a platform for ongoing corruption, abuses of power. It's actually a hideous representation and proof that Indonesia is not a real democracy.
Yeah, definitely, Paul. And I think some of the tensions that you alluded to as one of the main factors that will come out of during the elections, especially with the candidates, is this anti-Chinese sentiment that has been growing in many parts of rural Indonesia, where you have these big strategic national projects taking over land, destroying the environment and livelihoods, and people are not compensated well enough or given jobs also. And this dynamic we've seen has caused violence over the past few years at nickel sites in Indonesia, yet Indonesia wants to be, a stable nickel producer. So these kind of contradictions and factors will all come out to play, and it could be an election where we see some unrest, especially in Papua, with the West Papua National Liberation Army. They will seek to disrupt the elections, and they are in a stronger position than they were before. So
I don't know that they have any significant effect on the national election, but social media education does. The old cronies that control plutocracy are continuing to manipulate society for their own gain. They think, however, they can put out simple messaging and get away with it. But the previous elections show that there is a sudden shift away from the old guard towards the new guard. Unfortunately, we've had a succession of new guards that, as they leave office, become part of a new formed old guard that tries to set up their own fiefdom. I think Indonesians are very canny and very politically aware. They're not like Australians where they just sit there looking at the next football score. They're very astute politically. Unfortunately, or unfortunately for those at the top end of the plutocracy, and fortunately for members of society, the Indonesians are a high level of access to handphones, apps, cheap data. So we can expect a late shift that's going to work against anyone seen to be linked to the old. Unfortunately, society at this point hasn't worked out consciously that Jokowi's milking them just like Suharto, Sukarno, Megawati, and all the use of callous and everybody else that's in it for themselves. I think we could probably wind it up there, mate. I think it's important we get this out sooner than later. I think we should issue this Mithma to our clients. Okay?
Sure, Paul. Thank you so much. That was very insightful.
Cheers. See you.
Thanks.